Welcome to part 2 in our 3-part series on spiritual growth. Part 2 is titled Discerning Your Path Forward, and lesson 1 is called Embracing the Beatitude Life. I write about the Beatitudes in the final chapter of my book called Moving in God's Direction, so I'll be drawing some ideas from that chapter. The opening photo that we have here is an image of a footbridge. It's on the Ridgeline Trail in the South Hills in my town, which I hike about once a week. And I love this little footbridge. It's beautiful. It's also a metaphor for the impassable terrains that we must cross to move forward in our own lives. So it's a sweet little bridge on a sweet little trail, and I'm happy to share that with you. So it's easier to like the Beatitudes than to live them. I'm speaking first of all of personal experience, but it's also my observation that Jesus speaks some very inspiring words, but they also are deeply challenging words. And so I'm going to take a look at the challenge embedded in each of the Beatitudes. I'm drawing from the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 5, where Jesus begins his inaugural teaching, and where he really lays out over the course of 3 chapters, 5 through 7, lays out his vision of the reign of God, lays out really his Father's dream for the way life should be here on earth. So we'll begin Beatitudes. The Beatitudes fall into 3 clusters. The first cluster is ways of being with God. That would be Beatitudes 1 through 3. Beatitudes 4 through 6 are ways of being with self. And the final cluster is ways of being in the world. So we'll begin with that first cluster, ways of being with God. And so I'm going to read from my book, which is also reading from Scripture, in the first Beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the reign of God is theirs. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the reign of God is theirs. Blessed are those who are poor, and everything will be theirs, is essentially what Jesus is saying. But poverty of spirit is something that we encounter and experience by virtue of our humanity, our poverty of spirit. And so we can rightly ask, what is my poverty? We might properly ask, what are my poverties, in the plural? The poverty of, maybe poverty of experience, poverty of learning, poverty of relationships, the poverty of not being able to make someone love me, the poverty of my mortality, the fragileness of my life, the poverty of everything that is tentative and transitional, the poverty of death. And so we can ask, what is my poverty? What are my poverties? So I invite you to sit with those questions. The second Beatitude says, blessed are they who mourn, for they will be consoled. Blessed are they who mourn. Mourning is hard work. Grieving is hard work. It's not work that we willingly want to do. Sometimes it's work that we avoid, and it eventually catches up with us. And Jesus says, blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be consoled. So the worthy question is, what in my world needs to be mourned? Maybe the world of my personal life, transgressions, things I've lost. What needs to be mourned? In my family, in my community, What needs to be mourned? In my state, my nation, in my world, what needs to be mourned? And the only way to the blessedness on the other side of mourning is to actually go through the grieving, the mourning, the honest work of letting go. The third beatitude says, "Blessed are the meek, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs." Blessed are the meek, the ones who don't ask for too much, the ones who don't really raise their voices, the ones who don't push ahead. And the kingdom of heaven is theirs. That's what Jesus teaches. So we can ask the worthy question, if that's the blessedness, then where am I pushing too hard? Where am I insisting and pushing my agenda, my timeline, my plan, my vision of how things should be? Where am I pushing too hard? It might be pushing for, an advancement in career. It might be pushing for family members to live the way I think they should be living. It might be pushing where I think my voice isn't being heard and I need to shout a little louder. Where am I pushing too hard? Where am I invited to live a little more meekly and to trust that what I desire will eventually be given to me? The second cluster of Beatitudes include Beatitudes 4 through 6, ways of being with self. And since none of us live the totally hermit life, we know that being with self also has to do with being with others. These three Beatitudes, 4 through 6, have to do with attitude and disposition of heart and awareness of what in the world is going on. So let's take a look at these three Beatitudes. Beatitude number 4 says, "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness," who hunger and thirst for righteousness, "for they will be satisfied." Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. So this beatitude has to do with the injustices that I notice, the injustices in my world. And so the worthy question is, what injustices move me to action? Perhaps in my family, my neighborhood, my workplace, perhaps in my town, the state I live in, my nation, my world. What injustices move me to action? So I do some things in my neighborhood and in my community, but I also have a long paper trail of postcards that I have sent to elected officials who represent me. And if they are of Christian faith, I begin by saying, as a fellow Christian, I would like to call to your attention. If they are of a Catholic faith, I will say, as a fellow Catholic, I would like to draw to your attention. If I don't know their tradition, or if they don't seem to have a spiritual base that they're working from, I will say, as a fellow person of conscience, I would like to draw to your attention. So I can act on injustices anywhere in my nation, my state, and also in my world. I have written to global bankers, and I have actually gotten responses. Yes, I have. When I see injustice in the banking industry or any other industry that breaks the heart of God. So we can act in those ways. The fifth beatitude says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Blessed are the merciful who notice suffering. So again, we can ask, whose suffering is eased because of me? Whose suffering is eased? Is it someone who's hungry on the sidewalk and would really like a sandwich? Is it someone with emotional suffering who needs a listening ear? Whose suffering is eased because of me? Is it starving children in a nation far away from my home, whose suffering may be eased because I'm able to contribute financially to an initiative to relieve their suffering? Whose suffering is eased because of me? And Beatitude 6, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the pure of heart. I like to think, blessed are they with clean windshields, for they shall see the road. We oftentimes think of the reward as being able to see God because we have pure hearts. And I say, having a pure heart is necessary to see God. Without a pure heart, you can't have a hope of seeing God. So we might ask the question, where is purity expressed in my life? Purity of intention, purity of service, purity of commitment, purity of action. Where is purity expressed in my life? And the companion question is, who is blessed because of that? So it's a beautiful, beautiful beatitude to take to heart. So the final cluster of Beatitudes has to do with ways of being in the world, ways that we show up, ways of being a people, of being visible, of being part of humanity. So let's take a look at Beatitude 7. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Well, I really want to be called a child of God, a daughter of God. So I have to pay attention to how I be a peacemaker in the world. So the worthy question is, how do my expressions of peace touch the world? Is it through presence, being present to another? Is it through listening? Is it through de-escalating tense situations? Now that captures my attention. So I went through some training for de-escalation because I live downtown and I walk downtown and I encounter a lot of people downtown. And I remember one evening I heard a commotion in the parking lot of my apartment building. I looked out and I saw a confrontation going on that was not okay. Not okay. So I grabbed my keys and my iPhone and ran downstairs and walked right in the midst of the confrontation. And you can hear the story and the outcome in my audio track called What Peacemaking Looks Like. It's on my album called Free to Be Free, and you can hear it on Spotify. I encourage you to go listen to that story because it's an example of what peacemaking can look like and the courage that can change a very tense situation. So the eighth beatitude is, blessed are they. Now this is hard. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, who care enough about righteousness to put their body on the line, to stand up, to speak out, to be present and counted. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. And this is where we might like the Beatitudes more than want to live them, because this is where we actually have to be honest with ourselves and say, there is unrighteousness in this situation, in this place, in this world. I am not willing to let that happen, and I am willing to stand up and be present. This is not an easy beatitude. And so we might ask the question, what wounds do I bear for the sake of the reign of God? Is it social stigma? Certainly on social media, we can courageously say what we stand for, which may rub against the grain. It may bring a lot of unwanted, very unpleasant, and even uncivil comment. Am I willing to bear social stigma for the sake of righteousness? Am I willing to do jail time for civil disobedience, the way Dorothy Day certainly was known for doing, choosing to publicly disobey unjust laws and to stand with the gospel in the cause of righteousness? So we really have to ask, how far are we willing to go? And Jesus actually turns up the heat a little bit. He says, after all of that, he says, blessed are you. Now in all the Beatitudes, he has been saying, blessed are they. Now he says, blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. And then he says, speaking like a madman, he says, rejoice, rejoice, and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Blessed are you when you are persecuted for the cause of righteousness. Blessed are you. And I want to say, Lord, are you speaking to me? And he nods his head and says, yes, yes, I am. Blessed are you. So these Beatitudes are very personal and very challenging, and I will say deeply transformative. And if all you do this week is choose one Beatitude to draw close to and to embrace and engage earnestly, that will be a tremendous step forward. The Beatitudes invite us into willing vulnerability. Nobody likes vulnerability. We don't want to go there. We don't want to come close to it. It might be contagious. We don't want to touch it. But willing vulnerability is something else. Jesus lived a life of willing vulnerability. The short definition of it is costly love. Choosing to be vulnerable in the cause of love. Jesus embraced willing vulnerability. The early church actually sang a hymn about that. It's a hymn that we find in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 11, which begins, though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not deem equality with God as something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men. So Jesus embraced willing vulnerability, and he shows us how it's done, which means it's up to us also to embrace willing vulnerability. Willing vulnerability always is for the good of the other. It's not just to do it. It is an expression of costly love for the other. And willing vulnerability, whether we are of Christian faith or not, willing vulnerability for the good of the other always reveals the reign of God, or what I call the land of the right side up. So a worthy question is, why is embracing the Beatitude life vital to your spiritual growth? Quite simply, it frees you to live God's vision of the reign of God, the land of the right side up. It frees you to live God's vision of the way things always were meant to be. So Matthew's inaugural teaching section, which is chapters 5 through 7, presents Jesus' teaching on God's vision of how we might be in right relationship with God, with self, and with the world in which we live. So I offer you this practice with your Bible open to Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 and onward. You can ask yourself, how am I living each of these Beatitudes? The Beatitudes, you will discover, actually are an examination of social conscience. We're very good at the examination of moral conscience. The Beatitudes offer us an examination of social conscience. Ask yourself, which of these Beatitudes engage me the most? Which of them really connect with my life and the way I live? The third question, not so easy, which of these Beatitudes challenge me the most? Which are the ones I wish I didn't have to read? Be honest about the answer. You can ask yourself, what does that challenge tell me about my work in this world? What work is waiting to be done? This is actually a vocational question. It points out the path that is waiting for you. A vocational question. What do these Beatitudes tell me about my work in this world? So in our next session, we're going to explore your 2-word mission. I want you to be with me. I hope you can join me.